Hello and welcome to another video tutorial. My name is Britta Swiderski, and today I wanted to go over tips and tricks and the basics of using a die cut machine. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about the Sizzix Big Shot because that is what I'm familiar with. Also ones that are very similar to this, the Sizzix Vagabond by Tim Holtz is really great. It's on my wish list. And it's more expensive, but it's automatic, so you push it through and you press the button instead of cranking it. And then there's also the Cuttlebug, which has a little bit of a different platform system, but it will still handle all of the same dies. So when you're comparing prices over which one to buy, look at those and decide which one's right for you. From what I know, it's basically the Cuttlebug and the Sizzix are pretty much the same machine. It depends on what kind of area you're putting it in and what works for you. So try both of them out. See if you can try out a friend's machine or go to a crop or a scrapbook store and see if you can actually feel the machines and see what feels right for you. Because the Cuttlebug and the Sizzix are pretty much very similar, and you can use any type of dies in both of these machines. So I'm going to get started with the basics of the Big Shot. The Big Shot is essentially, it's a 10-pound machine with the platform. It has a handle here, and it basically takes up a 14-inch long space by 12 with the handle included, so like 8 inches wide, and then about 7 inches tall. And I just keep it on a shelf right next to my desk. And that works for me. So it is kind of bulky, but it's very, very stable, which is why I chose it over the Cuttlebug. It doesn't rock back and forth on your work surface because it has these nice, oops, bumped my camera there, nice rubber feet that stay very steady on your table. It comes with a multi-purpose platform, which they're actually switching over to a different system. So I won't spend too much time talking about this. But the platform system, essentially, no matter what, is a base that's really hard plastic, and then some tabs or shims on top of it. And you never cut on this place. It's just meant to get the right height underneath the rollers. And then these are the clear cutting plates, and you use these, and these are what the die cuts against. And you can see there are outlines of dies on here. Every time you die cut, you get lines in these. It doesn't affect the overall image. You can get little impressions or dents on your cardstock, but the reverse side won't have them because it'll be pressed up against the die, obviously. And you replace these when they start warping a lot or if they crack or something like that. But this is my second set of plates, and I've had my Sizzix for 3 years now. So you really can get a lot of use out of the plates. And I think the plates are somewhere between $10 and $15, maybe $20, but trust me, it's a very, very useful thing to have around. So this is the Big Shot, and I really do love it. It works like a charm, and I'm saving it for the Vagabond because that's a really strong and sturdy machine, and it makes the die cutting process a little bit faster since you can press things through. And a lot of times I do prep work where I'm cutting out a lot of things at once, so that makes it important to me to save up for it, and it has a really great motor in it. So that's my next purchase as far as die cut machines go, and I've had a chance to use them in workshops before, and it's just really, really awesome. So I highly recommend it if you can afford buying the Vagabond versus the Big Shot. But it is essentially the same system, just with a motor instead of a crank. So I'm going to talk about the basics of die cutting, and this really goes for any the two Sizzix machines and the Cuttlebug. Because those are what I'm kind of familiar with, that no matter what, you're going to be able to cut and use them for these three types of things. We have the original dies, which are about, a half-inch thick. We have wafer thin dies, including the ones that are longer, like the strip dies that Tim Holtz does with Sizzix. They're actually a little bit thicker than these, but essentially use the same system. And then we have embossing folders. I'm going to go through die cutting in 3 different parts, one for each of these 3 different types of dies. So you can click on the links on the screen here or down below in the description below, and it will take you to the part of the video that you want to see. So click here for, or the first link for standard die cuts. Click in the middle for wafer thin die cuts or thin dies, and click here for the embossing folders. Alright, so with dies, first I want to talk about how I store them. I have them in this little bin here. It's about the size of a CD case, and I got it from Target. It's part of their Itso storage collection. And you can see here that I just have a small label on the front, and then I put in my dies like this. And they fit pretty well. They're a little too big for this. So eventually, if I have more dies, I will switch over to a wider box. But right now, it's not that big of a deal. And then I also keep my embossing folders, my extra wafer thin dies, ones that I don't use as much or don't fit in my other way I store my dies. And then my embossing pads, which I'll talk about later. And my Nellie Snellen dies, which are more like the metal wafer thin dies. And then some more stamps. And also all of the packaging for my dies that are in other methods. So I keep the little sheets that come with, you know, my spellbinders and my favorite things dies, just in case I ever need them. So I keep them in this little CD case. And now we'll talk about original Sizzix dies. You can see I only have 3. I might have another one actually floating around here. But for my purposes, I usually end up hand cutting or using my wafer thin dies. So these dies are more expensive because these are the traditional way of making die cuts. And these are awesome. It's a hidden blade inside foam, and when you run it through the die cut machine, the foam gets pressed down and the blade cuts through the paper. So this is a traditional die where you really can't see the image on here. But once you cut through, they have pretty amazing detail, and they will cut through anything. They will cut through felt, chipboard, anything that will essentially fit through your machine that's in a sheet-like form. These will cut, and this is the only kind of die that will cut all materials. So this will cut through felt and everything like that all the time because of the sharp blade. So there are some trade-offs there. So this is the original kind of die where it's kind of ambiguous, it's hidden, but you can see the pattern. This is tattered pine cone. So we have, this is the pine cone that you can roll up, and then this is the leaf that goes with it. Then here we have a movers and shapers die, which is something that Tim Holtz does a lot of with his dies. And I believe Sizzix also has ones that aren't Tim Holtz branded, but they're still the same type. And you can see that it's the same exact system, there's just no foam in the middle. So you can either put in this foam piece that just raises it exactly to the surface, make sure the paper doesn't fall in there after you die cut it. And you can just leave that in there and it cuts like a normal die cut. Or you can put one of the movers and shapers that they sell separately inside of this. And I really like this. It creates a nice little frame because they have a coordinating one to go in the middle. Also, they have different shapes and you can change them out. If you want to put this one in here, you can. If you want to put a snowflake in here, you can. It works all across the board. These, since they are thinner, obviously, than the full thing, and there's that back to allow for, if you want to use these by themselves, you need a base tray. That's essentially this back piece without any die on it. And you need to buy that separately. But for my purposes, I don't really need it because if I'm using these shapes, I can always just cut out a frame, and then you get 2 shapes for 1 cut. And then there are also border dies, which work exactly like the original dies. You just have to line up your paper a little bit differently. and you can see the impression here of where the line cuts, and you place your paper over the top and then run it through. So now I'm going to show you by running this through here. I have a standard size card front. I've just cut down a regular size sheet of paper, and I'm just going to cut this right here. I'm going to cut half of this one because that's my paper for today, but you can always use half of this as like a file tab or something like that. And then for this, so you roll out your pads. I usually store them right in the middle like that so they're not sliding around. It's the perfect place to store them. It doesn't damage them at all. And then you don't even need the platform for this because look how thick this is. It's the exact same thickness as the die. So you just put your plain cutting plate down, and then you put your other cutting plate on top of the die. And Sizzix recommends, and most things recommend, that you use your die facing up and not down. From what I have experienced, this doesn't actually make a difference. It's more what's convenient for you, but I'm sure they've done research on it. So if you're a person that likes to go by the book a lot, keep it facing up. Now I'll just roll it through. And it's as simple as that. Make sure you don't put your fingers in there. That's a lot of pressure. And then you can see it left marks on my clear plate, but that's fine. It's supposed to do that. And then we have our wonderful little die cuts. So we have our outside piece. We have our inside frame piece. We have our movers and shapers piece. And this is where a die pick is helpful. It's kind of like a needle tool, but a little bit stronger. It doesn't bend. You can get in under the foam if it's not popping out correctly. And then we also have this half piece left over. Another thing is you might want to consider putting your paper face down onto your die, so that when the blade cuts it, it cuts through the paper, and then the cut edge is on the back. This doesn't really bother me because I usually ink the edges anyways, but you can see here, if my camera will focus, that the edge kind of does curve up towards the front, and you might not want that little bit of white edge showing. So that is how you cut using an original die. Next, we're going to talk about wafer thin dies, which are all the rage right now in the crafting industry because they're much cheaper to produce, and there's a lot of companies that do them to match their stamp sets, which is really, really fun. You can do a lot of really great things with them. Drawbacks are that they don't cut through everything, like felt they have a hard time with, or anything thicker than thick cardstock they have issues with. But they are incredibly safe. I'm running my finger over this. It's not cutting me. It's not exactly enjoyable, but it's not cutting me. And they're really easy to store, and they don't take up hardly any space at all. My main storage for my wafer thin dies are these wonderful folders. I can't tell you enough awesome things about these wonderful folders. They're manufactured by Quick Cuts, and they're 8x10 magnetic folders that were manufactured for their own dies, but they work for any metal die. So this is the one where I have my favorite things dies and some of my paper tray ink favorite dies. I only have some paper tray ink ones because I keep the rest in little baggies. So I just have my favorite ones in here. And then that lets me give space to my spellbinders. And then I have two more of these too. One for Sizzix framelits and one for more spellbinders but the labels. So you can see that they stick here. They're not too stuck down, but they're nice and organized. And then I keep the little cardboard piece that came with this in here. And I will have links to where you can buy these on my blog. The best place to buy them that I found is Amazon, and which is really awesome because they're also a Prime item, so you can get free shipping if you spend like $25, or if you're a Prime member, you can get them shipped for free. So check out my blog for that link. They're really, really cool. I have 4 of them, and I'll probably get another 1 or 2 along the line. And I just wrote labels and then stuck them down with packing tape here and here. So that way I can keep track of what is inside of these without having to open them up each time. And then I also have some of my stamp and die cut sets from Hero Arts and Sizzix. And this one I just keep how it was sold, just like this, and then put the stamp set in the same plastic bag, which I buy these clear bags from clearbags.com, I believe, or clearenvelopes.com, I can't remember, one of the two. I will have a link to where I purchased these. These are where I keep all of my 4x6 stamp sets, my clear stamp sets, and I hang them along an IKEA rail, which I'll talk more about this in a future video about my space, but I just keep these in here. And once this adhesive wears off, once I use them a lot, I'll just keep them in a plastic bag instead of having them laid out like this. And then I also have other dies, some random ones. This one's from Nellie Snellen. If you haven't checked these out, they sell them at Simon Says Stamp, and I will link to them in my blog post. They're really awesome because they're super intricate frames, and they create really cool shapes. And you can actually cut these apart. I just have this stuck down together. It comes on a piece of cardboard, and you can literally take these apart and use them how you want, or punch them all together and get a whole bunch of shapes within shapes. It's really, really cool. So yeah, I just keep these in the same place that I keep my embossing folders and my original dies, just in this CD bin. It's my die bin, along with other paper tray ink dies that are labeled and bagged according to what they're called. So now that I've shown you how I store my wafer thin dies, I'm going to show you how I cut with them. So I'm starting out with my Sizzix back at its normal state with the platform and the 2 clear plates. This platform is special because when you use a metal die like this, you just keep all the tabs down and it's the perfect height. If you for some reason are feeling like you need more detail or it's not cutting through all the way, you can even add another piece of cardstock or a piece of thin chipboard to give you some more push. But mostly you just leave it like this when you have a thin die. You only flip the tab up really when you use embossing folders or something that's much thicker than just a normal piece of metal, which is, as you can see, pretty thin. So I'm just going to place my cutting platform down, place one of my pads down, and then just create my sandwich with my paper. And I'm going to place my die face down for this. I like it because I can see where I'm placing the die, even though that's probably not the recommended way, but that's the way I do it, and it's comfortable for me. And then place the other pad on top of it and just run it through. And you'll hear a little bit of cracking, but that's just the die cutting machine doing what it needs to do, and sometimes it just makes sounds like that. So don't worry, you're not breaking your machine. As long as you can still turn the handle with relatively easy force, as long as you're not forcing it through, you're not going to break anything. So now I have this. It cut right through, and it cut through so well that they actually stuck to the plastic mat instead of my die. And I like the My Favorite Things dies because they have the little poker holes in the back. So if one does get stuck in here, which they very, very rarely do, you just use a little pencil or even your poker tool and get through those and poke out the little bits. So we have the 3 little hearts, and it's the same for pretty much any metal die that you have. Even nestabilities work the exact same way. For the ones that you have where you've stamped an image first and now are placing the die over it, you can even use a piece of washi tape or something like that. Or if you're using this in the middle of a card and you need to keep it in the exact same place, you're going to want to put a little piece of not very sticky tape just to make sure it doesn't wiggle around before or while you're cutting it. Next, we're going to talk about embossing with embossing folders. And Cuttlebug and Sizzix embossing folders, and any other company for that matter, all work in the Sizzix. You might just have to add an extra sheet of paper or take or leave the shim, and just kind of judging it according to how deep you want the impression. The brands between Sizzix and Cuttlebug are a little bit different. The main difference between Cuttlebug and Sizzix embossing folders is on the Tim Holtz embossing folders, the plastic is deeper etched than, say, the Cuttlebug ones, or the main Sizzix ones for that matter. And this can be beneficial to you or non-beneficial to you. It depends on what look you're going for. So just play around with it, add a piece of paper, take a piece of paper out, remove a tab or add a tab. And as long as you're not forcing anything through your machine, it's going to be fine. You can always run through it again if you felt like you didn't get enough pressure. So I'm going to run through this Seen Spots folder. I store these, as I showed you, in the same bin that I store my other die cutting materials. And I don't like keeping the packaging because there's a whole bunch of plastic. So I just write the name on the folder so that I can remember what it's called. And then, in order to use it, you just want to flip up the second tab, because this is about the thickness of the embossing folder, so we don't need that. And then here, if you have a thinner embossing folder, you want to use tab 1. But if you want less pressure, or you have a thicker embossing folder, you want to bring up this little shim. You can see it's just a piece of plastic, so it's not going to make a huge difference, but it might be the difference that you want in the style that you're going for. So just try it, experiment with it. But usually I just go with tab 1 down and it works just fine. So I'm going to put in this piece of cardstock, and you can see here that the bubbles are raised on this side and recessed on this side. So if I want my bubbles sticking out towards me, I need to be where they're pushing through the paper. So I'm going to stick this in here, get it lined up how you want it, and then kind of squeeze it shut with your hand and put it down. And then you're just making another sandwich like you did with the dies and running it through your die cut machine. And this is where you want to make sure you're not getting too much resistance. Otherwise, you might need to put up that tab. But it's a little bit hard to go through, but that just means it'll get a really good impression, which is what we want. So now we have this through the die cutting machine, and you can see this wonderful embossed look. That's kind of shallow embossing, but still perfect for any inking or sanding techniques you want to do. Cuttlebug also makes folders that are bigger than this, that actually extend all the way past a card front. But for my purposes, usually I'm not using a full size of a card. This is the full size of a card. So if you can imagine this with a 1/4 inch border all the way around, you wouldn't have an issue with the design not going all the way. But Cuttlebug does make folders that are slightly bigger, just not in all of the same designs. So that's something you might want to look out for, and know that most folders that you will buy won't cover an entire card front, which is fine because you can't really put a card easily in a embossing folder anyways. I also wanted to share one extra tip about embossing, and this is kind of a fun thing. You can emboss metal plates as well, and Paper Tray Ink has these, as well as some other companies, where they have the metal plate instead of the plastic folder. And these are usually double-sided, and you need these tan rubbery mats in order for them to work. These are purchased from Paper Tray Ink, but you can also get the ones that Spellbinders sells, and they're actually a little bit bigger. So if I were to purchase them again, I'd buy them from Spellbinders. But they're essentially the same thing, and they're pieces of rubber. And it just helps you make the sandwich that compensates for the width of the folder. So in order to do that, you just make your sandwich where your paper would be here, and then your mats are on top of it, and run it through just like you would an embossing folder. Probably without the bottom tab though, So it would be a little bit thicker than an embossing folder, and that is why you have that option to lift up that plastic shim. But what we can also do is cut and then emboss with metal dies. So we have nestabilities are a perfect example of this, where first you can cut it. So you just place your die on your paper, and then we have all of our tabs down, just going to run it through like a normal metal die. And you can see we have it right here. I'm going to pop that out. You can even leave it in the paper if you want, honestly. And then we're going to emboss it because the cutting edge right here is in the middle of the frame. So we want to emboss this edge here. So you just pop it back into right where it just cut, which isn't difficult to do. And then we just follow that same sandwich that I just showed you with the, like we were doing an embossing folder. And I'll actually keep tab 1 down for now and then see if it's too thick. So we're going to put plate, then die, and then we make sure that this is all back and settled in again. And then we can put our tan mats over it, and this is what's going to press down into the die and make the impression. And then we put the other cutting mat right over that. So we have our sandwich, cutting mat, stuff, cutting mat, platform, and we just roll it through. And those mats help to make the impression here. So you can even see on the back that now it hasn't cut again. It has left the embossing. So that's really cool. And you can do this, you can just emboss and not cut. So with any metal die. So if you wanted to get just the ridges in this piece of paper, you could just run it through with the tan mat. So you don't need to cut and then emboss. But if you want to do both, you should always cut it first because then it's easier to make sure it's in the right place. So yeah, so there you have it. A cool, fun, cut and embossed die cut. So there we have a nice little introductory course, I guess you can say, to die cutting and using the Sizzix Big Shot. If you use a different machine or have a different platform, you'll have to check your user's manual to see exactly how to do all the same things, but I guarantee you that you will be able to do them with maybe just a little bit of finagling or using an extra piece of chipboard or something like that. But I hope this gave you a really good idea of what types of things die cuts are good for and how to do them with this crazy looking die cut machine. So if you want to go back to any of these parts in case you missed something, want to see something again, you can click in the columns here for the original die cut, here for wafer thin die cuts or metal die cuts, here for embossing folders, and here for our bonus tip, cutting and embossing. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and make sure you leave any comments in the comment section below on YouTube or over on my blog at brittaswiderski.com. Over on my blog, I'll have a full list of all the supplies I showed you, including the example dies that I used and my storage solutions, and hopefully that gives you a good place to start your own collection. So thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you again on another video tutorial.